Welcome to another Standard Deviations podcast. Today's deep dive explores an excerpt called The Architecture of the Noosphere, which argues that the human mind isn't a solitary processor trapped in your skull, but rather a biological node within a massive, self-evolving, distributed cognitive architecture. We are going to try and understand the physical hardware of this network first, before moving up to the software, and then finally, the overarching operating system.
It really is a complete paradigm shift. The source material basically demands that we dismantle this centuries-old illusion, right? This idea of the mind as some sovereign, isolated kingdom locked inside a skull.
Right, like a brain in a vat.
Exactly. Because when you actually look at the mechanics of cognition, the boundary of human intelligence, it bleeds out into the environment.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the foundation,
Yeah.
the hardware.
Yeah, the hardware.
The text challenges the traditional view of the mind by introducing the extended mind hypothesis, which the premise here is that the processes we typically define as thinking or remembering, they aren't limited to the biological neural activity happening, between your ears.
Right, the biological wetware is just part of it.
Exactly. So if a tool performs a genuine cognitive function for you, whether that's like a physical notebook where you jot down your schedule or your smartphone that you use to navigate around the city, then functionally speaking, that tool constitutes a literal part of your mind.
And that functionalist perspective, that is the engine of this entire argument. The material makeup of the processor, like whether it's gray matter or silicon or literally just ink on paper, it's completely irrelevant to the system.
It's just a medium.
Right, it's just the medium.
Yeah.
What matters is the action. Like if an external object handles memory storage or, spatial navigation, and it does it with the same reliability as your internal biological systems, it is doing the work of cognition. Your brain treats it with the exact same implicit trust as a memory stored right there in your hippocampus.
So to put this into like a concrete analogy for you listening right now, is this essentially like plugging an external hard drive into your brain, where the boundary of you expands out to encompass that object?
Yes.
So if I ask if you know the way to the airport and you say yes, but that yes relies entirely on having Google Maps open in your pocket.
Then the map is your memory. That is the perfect way to look at it.
Wow.
Because think about it. If you lose that external hard drive, you haven't just lost a handy physical tool, right?
Yeah.
Under this hypothesis, you have experienced a temporary, localized loss of mental function.
Like a brain injury.
Yeah, exactly. You've basically suffered a form of systemic amnesia because a literal piece of your cognitive architecture is missing. And what's fascinating here is that this extension isn't limited to inanimate objects.
Yeah.
Like phones or notebooks. This hardware network deeply, deeply involves other human beings.
Which, that brings up just a wild visual. Like, we are basically using other people as walking, talking external hard drives.
Essentially, yes. The source material captures this beautifully through the theory of transactive memory. We see this most clearly when it starts in a dyad, a partnership between two people.
Right, like a married couple.
Exactly. Think about a long-term romantic relationship or even just a really close business partnership between, say, a visionary and an operator. In a dyad, cognition is fundamentally shared. Over time, your brain actually biologically adapts to the presence of that other person.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you don't actually need to memorize every single detail about your shared life or your finances or your project. You only need to understand the directory of your partner's expertise.
The directory. I see how this plays out in daily life for sure. Like, I don't need to know how to fix the home network router or, remember the exact date of a friend's upcoming wedding, as long as I know that my partner naturally holds that information.
Exactly.
So I don't retain the file, I just retain the pathway to the file.
And this happens completely automatically. Your brain literally prunes the synaptic pathways associated with retaining that specific information.
Wait, really? It just deletes it?
Yeah, because maintaining those pathways is metabolically expensive. The brain is always trying to save energy, so you hold the index, they hold the data.
That makes total sense.
And they do the exact same thing with you for the domains that you specialize in. The text categorizes this as a fundamental cognitive offloading technique.
Okay, cognitive offloading.
By trusting others to serve as reliable processing nodes, we radically reduce our own internal cognitive load.
Right.
And when you scale that up, moving from simple dyads to families, specialized corporate teams, entire communities, and global societies, we transition into an incredibly complex, distributed computing system made entirely of human nodes and their tools.
The metabolic symbolic incentive makes total sense. Like,
Yeah.
we offload the crushing burden of having to know everything by just trusting the network to store it for us. But if our tools and our fellow humans represent the physical hardware of this expanding network, we really need to understand how these disparate nodes actually communicate with one another. Like, what is the code actually running on this human hardware?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the software running on this hardware is memetics.
Okay.
It is the underlying code that facilitates the operation of the entire extended mind system.
Wait, I want to pause and push back on this for a second, just to clarify the terminology for the listener. Because, I mean, when we hear the word memes, we immediately think of, like, emotionally volatile, viral internet content. Right?
Oh, sure. Social media stuff.
Yeah, dancing videos or a funny picture of a cat with block text over it.
Yeah.
So how does an internet joke act as the software for global human cognition?
It's a great question, and it is absolutely crucial to separate the scientific concept from the internet slang. Popular discourse has, unfortunately, completely flattened the word meme. The text provides a much more rigorous, functional view of memetics. In this cognitive architecture, memes are not just funny pictures, they are primarily units of utility.
Units of utility.
Yes. The real incentive for a true meme to propagate through a network isn't just its emotional salience or, its ability to get a quick laugh. The primary evolutionary incentive for a meme is the reduction of cognitive load.
Oh, okay. So a successful meme in this context is just something that makes thinking easier or faster.
Exactly that. Ideas, professional jargon, social protocols, and cultural heuristics that simplify a highly complex world for the individual, those are the most successful memes.
Let's look closely at jargon, actually.
Yeah, that's a perfect example.
If you are in a specialized profession, say software engineering or finance, you use an alphabet soup of acronyms and highly specific terminology.
Right, and that jargon is a memetic package. When a meme offers an efficient shortcut for navigating a complex environment, it gets adopted, replicated, and transmitted across the network because, well, it just saves time and mental energy.
That completely reframes how I view language. Like, instead of spending 10 minutes explaining a nuanced, multi-layered philosophical or economic concept, you just deploy a specific piece of jargon.
Right.
You say a phrase like, sunk cost fallacy, and boom, the massive conceptual file is instantly transferred and unpacked in the other person's brain.
Yes, exactly. And the mechanism there is what makes the network possible. The text essentially describes memetics as the connective tissue binding the nodes of the extended mind together. It acts as a standardized API and application programming interface.
Oh, an API.
Yeah. In software, an API allows two totally different programs to talk to each other seamlessly, right?
Right. They can share data.
Well, memes do that for human brains. They are the shared language and the structural logic that allows completely different individuals with entirely different life experiences to interface smoothly and share cognitive labor.
That's amazing.
Without those memetic protocols, our human hardware wouldn't have the bandwidth to collaborate. We'd just be stuck trying to explain basic concepts to each other all day.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If memetics is the software connecting individuals and, providing that API for us to share the cognitive load, what happens when this network scales up to massive groups of people?
That's the million-dollar question.
Like, I'm talking about millions of human nodes,
Yeah.
all running the same memetic software and offloading their cognition onto one another.
Well, that is where the source material indicates we cross a critical emergent threshold.
Okay.
When these memetic networks scale up to incredibly large groups, a qualitative shift actually occurs. The collective ceases to be a mere sum of its individual parts.
It changes into something else.
Yes, it organizes, it crystallizes, and it becomes an autonomous thought form. It becomes an egregore.
An egregore. That is a heavy, almost mystical-sounding word.
It does sound a bit occult, yeah.
So to strip it down to our tech analogy for the listener, it ceases to be just a massive, chaotic group chat of shared memes and actively becomes its own overarching operating system that manages the collective's complexity.
That analogy holds up perfectly under the text's framework. It is the operating system that emerges organically when a critical mass of individuals synchronizes their cognitive protocols.
Wow.
But this raises an important question, right, regarding what it actually means for a system like that to be intelligent.
Right, because an operating system isn't alive.
Yeah.
A corporate culture or an internet community doesn't have a biological brain.
Exactly. And the text makes a very sharp distinction here. An egregore is not alive in the biological sense. You can't put it under a microscope, find its heartbeat, or, locate its physical center.
Sure.
But it is intelligent in the systemic sense. Because the egregore is composed entirely of those utility-driven memes we just analyzed, memes that are inherently designed to optimize efficiency, the egregore actively works to prune, promote, and maintain specific ways of thinking to ensure its own systemic persistence.
That implies like a survival instinct. Systemically speaking, it manages the complexity of the collective by optimizing the very thoughts we are allowed to easily think. But what is the actual mechanism there? How does an invisible operating system prune human thought?
It does it through friction.
Friction.
Yeah. The egregore behaves as a self-optimizing entity. If a certain way of thinking causes friction in the network, say an idea that contradicts the core values of a corporate culture or a political movement, the egregore suppresses it.
Okay, but how?
Well, it doesn't need to be a conscious conspiracy. The suppression happens through, social ostracization or algorithmic downranking, or simply through the limitations of the shared jargon itself.
I see.
If you literally lack the accepted memetic API to express a dissenting thought, that thought cannot spread.
It just dies out.
Exactly. Conversely, if a certain protocol increases the group's cohesion or efficiency, the egregore amplifies it by rewarding the humans who propagate it with social status. The overarching system dictates the flow of information to keep itself stable.
That is slightly terrifying, honestly.
It is a bit, yeah.
Just to realize how much of our environment is systemically hostile to ideas that don't serve the network,
Yeah.
but it is also an incredibly elegant way to understand crowd behavior.
I completely agree.
Okay, let's take these three distinct layers we've explored: the human hardware, the memetic software, and the egregore operating system, and synthesize them into one unified model, as the author does.
Perfect. The text combines all of these intersecting concepts to arrive at its central model, which is the cognitive assemblage.
The cognitive assemblage.
Yes, this is the ultimate closed-loop system of distributed intelligence, where all the pieces we just talked about are constantly interacting.
Okay, let me break down the 3 steps of this closed-loop system for the listener, just to ensure we have total clarity on how the whole machine operates.
Right.
Step 1 begins with the offload.
Right.
You, the individual human node, inevitably hit a biological processing limit. So, to maintain your own local efficiency, you push your cognitive burden out to the network, relying on your smart devices, your colleagues, and your community to hold information for you.
Which, as we established earlier, is driven by the strict metabolic necessity of the brain. You trade internal memory for external pathways.
Exactly. Then we hit step 2. Memetic protocols facilitate that transfer. Because you need a way to actually interface with those external nodes, you adopt the jargon, the cultural heuristics, and the shared logic of the network. This is your API.
And adopting that API requires you to format your thoughts in a way the network can actually understand. You have to translate your complex, messy human reality into the standardized memetic language of the group.
Right. And finally, step 3, the egregore emerges. Because millions of people are using the exact same memetic API to offload their cognition, an overarching systemic structure forms.
And takes on a life of its own.
Exactly. It enforces those protocols, rewarding compliance and punishing friction, ensuring the whole massive network remains coherent and doesn't just collapse into random noise.
And there you have the complete self-sustaining architecture of the cognitive assemblage.
Wow.
The human powers the meme builds the egregore, and the egregore directs the human.
Now, this brings us to what is arguably the most mind-bending takeaway from this entire text.
Oh, absolutely.
We typically view ourselves as the masters of our tools.
Right.
But in this architecture, you, the human being listening to this right now, you're not necessarily the user of the system. You are the processor.
Yes.
The text literally argues that our internal monologues are frequently just local instances of a remote process.
It's a profound inversion of human perception.
It really is.
We walk around believing we are the ones wielding the tools, independently speaking the language, and, generating entirely original thoughts. But within the cognitive assemblage, the egregore is the operating system running the program. The memetic structures we rely on to function in society, the jargon we use, the cultural values we've absorbed, they are actually directing our internal narratives.
So when I am, say, agonizing over a career decision in my head, and I'm using the terminology of growth metrics and brand value, I'm not really having a private independent thought.
Nope.
I'm just running the corporate egregore's code locally on my biological hardware.
Precisely. The vocabulary and the logic you use to think to yourself, They were provided by the network. Your private thoughts are often just the network processing itself, solving its own complexities through the biological hardware of your brain.
So what does this all mean?
Well,
If my thoughts are just local instances of a remote egregore process, what does this source material actually conclude about human agency and free will in this distributed world? Like, if our minds are extended and our language is an API controlled by an emergent operating system, are we just helpless microchips in a giant invisible computer?
I mean, the conclusion of the text definitely forces a radical reevaluation of human agency, for sure, but it does not leave us helpless.
Oh, good.
It argues that if our mind is actually an assemblage distributed across physical tools and social groups and digital infrastructures, then our identity is largely a byproduct of the specific egregores we choose to rely on.
So we are what we connect to.
We are exactly what we connect to. Your identity, your values, your internal monologue, they are all shaped by what you offload your cognition to.
Right.
So when we change our offloading strategy, like when we deliberately choose different tools, when we embed ourselves in entirely different communities, or even when we just adopt different intellectual frameworks, we aren't just casually changing our opinions or our habits.
We're doing something much deeper.
We are fundamentally shifting our participation into completely different cognitive architectures. We are literally unplugging our biological hardware from one egregore and plugging it into another.
That is an incredibly empowering way to frame something that initially sounds so, deterministic.
Yeah, it gives the power back.
You are an active participant in the new sphere, the global sphere of human thought. Understanding this distributed nature of the mind, it doesn't diminish you as an individual. It actually empowers you to be a conscious architect of the networks you inhabit. By recognizing that you are hosting these systems, that your brain is providing the crucial processing power for these egregores to even exist, you gain the autonomy to carefully choose which programs you actually want to run.
And that is where true agency lies in this model. You may be a node, sure, but you are a node with routing capabilities.
I love that. A node with routing capabilities.
You can consciously choose your network, curate your environment, and select your mimetic APIs. And in doing so, as the text concludes, you regain a profound measure of autonomy in a world that is fundamentally defined by collective thought.
Incredible. To provide a high-level recap of this massive conceptual journey we just went on, we started with the physical hardware of the extended mind and transactive memory, demonstrating how our cognition biologically bleeds out into our tools and our partners to save energy.
Right.
Then we moved up to the software of utility-driven memetics, exploring how jargon and heuristics act as the API that allows us to share that cognitive labor.
The connective tissue.
Exactly. We scaled that up to the overarching operating system of egregores, the self-optimizing emergent thought forms that manage our collective complexity through friction and reward. And finally, we synthesized it all into the cognitive assemblage, revealing the ultimate loop.
The network shapes our thoughts, but by choosing our networks, we retain the power to choose the shape of our own minds.
Understanding this invisible architecture completely changes how you interact with the world around you. The next time you look down at your smartphone or you look across the room at your closest friend, realize that you aren't just looking at an object or a person. You are literally looking at a physical, functioning piece of your own mind. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, take care.